Hi, everybody. I'm going to walk through the Palmer Drought Severity Index exercise. Um, I'm recording this in September of 2023. I'm using the most recent version of Tableau. It's their Tableau 2023 version. So if things look a little bit different than yours, try not to panic. The same tools are generally there. The same concepts apply. Things could just be labeled a little bit differently. So first of all, I want to open that Excel file, and you can use, these are like the prompts to the different types of files you might want to open. So that I don't have to think, I always use the More button because then it'll search for all files. If I can't remember if something's an Excel spreadsheet or a CSV file, if you go looking for an Excel file and it is a CSV, you won't find it, and I find that really frustrating. So I use More, and that way I can see everything all at once and it's not filtering for me. When you do open a spreadsheet, or I should say a workbook that has multiple tabs in it or multiple sheets in it, you have to drag the sheet that you want. And this is why I always recommend that you look at your data in Excel first, because, or whatever it is, Google Sheets, whatever software you want to use, and get a sense for what you're working with first. I know that I need this page. I'm going to drag it into the viewer window. This is a new thing that they're doing in 2023. They're kind of giving you a little preview. This is also a preview of the data set. And so what you want to look at here are whether or not your field headers came in correctly, and do the values look correct. And if you read, hopefully, the little introduction to the Palmer Drought Severity Index, you know that it's a value, generally speaking, between 4 and -4. So this looks legitimate. This looks like a really weird number for a date. And so if you go up here, you can see that it's a hashtag, and this is what indicates what the properties are for this field. And so I want to change that to date. And then it reads it as an actual date instead of formatting it as a funky number. And you can see that our icon up here has changed. All right, so if I go over to the first worksheet, you can see here that the three, let me go back to data source. We've got date, the PDSI, and then an anomaly value, which is the difference for every given month between the Palmer Severity Drought Index and a 100-year average Palmer Severity Drought. So this is like the change between a 100-year average for any given month. All right, so those three fields we're looking for over here, and you can see that it put the date up at the top. There's a line here, and then we've got the anomaly and the PDSI values down below. In the olden days, and you might see in the instructions that I refer to these as dimensions and measures, and they don't have them labeled that way anymore, but up on top, these are our dimensions, and the anomaly and the PDSI values are our measures. These are the metrics that are continuous, that can be summed and aggregated, and the date is our categorical, even though a date is numeric and can also be aggregated, but it's up at the top here. So to get started, we can just cruise the date up to our columns and our Palmer Drought Severity into our rows. And the automatic display is a line chart, and this is basically for every year. It's displaying the value continuously over time, connected with a line. Now, one of the questions I ask you is, if we look at the range of values here, if we actually critically think about what we're doing, we might notice that these are really big numbers. They're not really between 4 and -4, and it's because Tableau defaults to summing the values. So what it's doing is it's taking January through December of every year and adding all the PDSI values together. And we want to change that to an average. So you can just access it. This is called a pill. Down here, we'll just change it to an average, and you'll see that these values change to what we would expect to see for the Palmer Drought Index values. Okay, so another thing that you might want to do is, instead of taking the line chart, change it to a bar chart. These are the average annual PDSI values over the period of record. Okay, so one of the other things that I just recommend you do for some eye candy is we can take this value and drag it to color. And so what Tableau is doing is it's taking the range of values. And again, if you look at the legend up here, you'll see that it doesn't automatically match the change that we made to averaging. So we have to do the same thing down here. But Tableau is just mapping the PDSI average values to this color ramp, which is a pretty good color ramp for what we're trying to show, values above and below 0. I'm just going to riff for a second. If you remember that in the introduction, I talk about how basically values between 0.49 or just below half and above 0.49, those values, it's like our margin of error, and that range of values is considered, quote unquote, normal. And so let's put in a reference band that indicates that kind of normal zone. We go over to the Analytics tab here, and you can see there's a lot of really great options, but we want a reference band. So you click on this and you drag it over, and I'm going to apply it to the PDSI values. And you can see that it's putting, it defaults to min and max, but we don't want that. We want to set our own values. So I'm going to go in here, and instead of minimum, I'm going to insert a constant value, and the minimum constant value is negative 0.49. I don't want to label it with the value. I'm going to customize it, and I want to say normal. Whoops, cap locks. Maybe normal values. Okay, and then same thing down here. Instead of the constant, instead of the maximum, let's put a constant value in, and we'll make it 0.49 for the top end, and I don't want to have a value there. So you can see it's dynamically updating. I can change the color and make that a little bit lighter. Oh, it's a little bit too light. There. So we're taking anything that falls in this zone with a grain of salt. They're considered kind of normal values. Now that doesn't, for whatever that's worth, that isn't on the answer form, but just to give you some orientation of how this works. So a couple of other tricks. If you plot up your data, and especially with bar charts, sometimes they don't read well if you've got categories down here with long descriptors. And so it's really easy to just flip your axes by swapping your rows and columns with this button right here. Doesn't make sense for what we're doing because time typically runs along the x-axis and reads from left to right. So we wouldn't do that, but it is just that simple if you're making like a population pyramid plot or something like that. That's how you can swap your axes really quickly. There are other things you can do. You can fit the entire view on your page. Right now mine is fitting, but sometimes when you put in a really big data set, it'll expand. So this is kind of how you can change the way the data views for you. Okay, so just remember there's the data and the analytics tab. This allows you to put in average lines or confidence intervals or things like that. And then over here is where you can kind of change the way your data looks. The other thing to know is this show me button up here. This gives you kind of a preview of all the different plot types you might want to use. And if you hover, it says, okay, if you want to make a box and whisker plot, you're going to need, you don't need a dimension, but you will need some kind of a measure value. So we're definitely going to explore a lot of these, but that's what that is and how you can hide it and find it again. All right, so let's move on with looking at some of the questions that I ask you to explore. Okay, so I'm going to skip the first two questions. You can think about those, but what month in the period of record has the driest PDSI, or the Palmer Drought Severity Index, on record in Utah? So if we go back to Tableau, we talked about how these are annual averages. So we need to deconstruct these. And instead of averaging, we need to display this by month. And one way to do that is to go up to our date pill, and instead of having it collapsed by year, we can show it by month. But if you look here, there's two sets, and we want the month and the year, not just the month. So if I click on this one here, you can see it does change the values on me, the color values. But what we're looking at here is every month. So if I hover over here, August, September, March, April, blah, blah, blah. So it's disaggregated the data for us. The other way, if you go up to month here, what this is showing us is an average for every October through the period of record. So going back to the late 1800s all the way through 2020, I can't remember what our most recent year is. But so, I mean, it's kind of an interesting thing to know anyway, that in August, November, and December, we, on average, have had near normal, but lower than normal values. And strangely, you know, in October, we have this kind of anomalous pattern happening. So I think this is a really nice trick to be able to do, but for the question I'm asking you, I want to know the month and year of the driest month and what year that happened in. And so I would just eyeball it here. If we hover, we can see this one is negative 6.59, so really dry. This one is negative 6.6, so a little bit drier. And this one is negative 6.58. So this is our winner right here. So that's August of 2002. But, you know, these are very close. Question 4 is another kind of eyeball question. We want to go back to our annual averages, and I just want to know how many of the 10 years leading up to this Milford Flat wildfire that happened in July of 2007, how many of the years leading up to that were drier than normal. And this is all about exploring data. Sometimes you look at a new data set and you already have a predetermined question in your head. Something that you're already interested in knowing. Sometimes you just get a data set and you need to plot it up, and then you notice something interesting, or maybe you just start getting curious, like, well, so I do remember when there was this fire, and I wonder what the Palmer Drought Severity Index had been doing for the decade leading up to that. So these are just questions that I've posed out of blatant curiosity. So I'm going to Control Z. Control Z works really well in Tableau, not like ArcGIS Pro. It actually does back you up all the way back to opening the data set. It's pretty incredible. So we're going to look for the Milford Flat fire in July of, actually we're just going to look for 2007, which is this guy here. And I said, I think, look at the years 1998 through 2007. So this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then that one doesn't count because that's not in the time period. So that's all I'm asking for, right? I'm just trying to get you to think about how you can dig into this data and ask and answer questions. You know, maybe you'd be interested in adding some kind of a constant line to mark where that is, and so we could put that here and set it this way. So 07, 01 of 2007. So this is when the fire happened. Okay, and for this last question, what I basically want to demonstrate is how you can filter the data to look at a specific time period. And so what I've done over here in Tableau is I just set up a new sheet. Same thing, I've got my years as my columns and the average PDSI. Remember to change that from sum so that our values look correct. And then I'm going to take our date and I'm going to run a filter. I want to set a range of dates. Oops. And then we're going to have it go from July of 1994 up to July. That didn't take that. There we go. Up to July 1st of this current year. Okay, that looks correct. And then we're going to have it just calculate the average for us. So I'm going to drop an average line onto the table, and you can see here that the average for that period of time is negative 0.85. And then one final thing, for the last question, I ask you to submit a PNG, and you can export your worksheet this way as an image. But if you're using the web app version of Tableau, you'll find that it doesn't have nearly as many features as the desktop version. I don't know a way to export PNGs or export images from the web app. So make sure you're using the desktop version so you have the full suite of tools at your fingertips. Okay, that's just sort of a fire hose introduction to Tableau, and you will get a lot more experience working with it this semester. Any questions, let me know. Thanks.